you see, having gone through the Beatlemania thing, nowadays it's nothing like that. I mean, I can walk down the street and somebody will say, "Oh, hi, John," and they usually say, "How's your immigration?" You know, if it's in New York, right? And they don't hassle me. I might sign one autograph, two autographs, you know? And I don't get hassled. And I went through that period where I actually couldn't go anywhere. And so now it's like heaven. I can go and eat. We go and eat. We go to the movies. We go wherever we want.
John Lennon was walking down a street on the west side of New York last night between 10 and 11 o'clock Eastern Time when he was shot down by an assailant. He is dead tonight in a senseless and terrible, terrible moment. The interview that you just saw, the portion of that interview, was first recorded here in New York at the NBC studios during April of 1975. And to this day, the John Lennon Show, as it is called in the Tomorrow series, is still one of the most often requested programs for repeat purposes. And we're going to run the entire interview tonight, not because it's a terrific interview or it's terribly entertaining or enlightening. It is, after all, 5 years old, but curiously, it turns out that possibly this interview is the last television interview that John Lennon ever did. It contains no historic information, nothing terribly new, but after all, it is a little bit of stuff and substance of a man who was part of a change, a revolution, if you will, in popular music back during the 1960s. And during the 1970s, John Lennon found a new lifestyle for himself, which he will discuss during this interview. A bit later on, we have Lisa Robinson, who did one of the last interviews with John Lennon, which will appear in the New York Times syndication service later on. And Mr. Jack Douglas, who produced John and Yoko Ono's current album, Double Fantasy, who was with John and Yoko shortly before his tragic death here in New York last night. We'll be right back to run the 1975 interview with John Lennon after these announcements, and I hope that you'll all stay with us. We'll be back here in about 2 minutes and 5 seconds. Promised, here is John Lennon, and a little bit later on in the program we'll talk about the possibility of his having to leave the United States, and at that time his attorney, Mr. Leon Wilds, will join us to make certain that John or I make no mistakes in the legalities. But I welcome you here, and I'm glad that you're here. As I said at the outset, back in 1964, after the cataclysmic arrival of the Beatles here in the United States and the great popularity you had on the Ed Sullivan program and others, there were many people who did not really understand what you were doing, and they thought then that your hair was long and that you looked modish, you know, and you were revolutionary. Does it surprise you at all that it took so many of us such a long time to get into your act and to realize what you were doing?
No, it was mainly parents, and they were against rock and roll, you know. Anyway, before the Beatles came along. I mean, people have been trying to stamp out rock and roll since it started.
Why do you think that is? What are they afraid of?
I always thought it was because it came from black music, and the words had a lot of double entendre in the early days. And it was sort of, you know, the white kids, our white, nice wasps are going to go crazy with all this moving their bodies. You know, and the music got to your body, and the Beatles just carried it a bit further, made it a little more white even than Elvis did, because we were English, you know. And people couldn't hear it. That's why they didn't understand it.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. You know, one could never understand the words until one sat down with the record album. I went to a couple of your personal appearances, including one in, I think, in Philadelphia in 1965 in an outdoor location.
Oh, yeah.
And there was so much screaming and so much carrying on. And did that bother you at all when you were doing those concerts? That people couldn't hear your music, that all they heard was themselves screaming?
It got a little boring. I mean, it was great when it first happened. When you'd come on, there'd just be nothing but wah, you know. But then we just became like lip-syncing, you know, miming. And sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good, you know.
When you guys were in the dressing rooms after these concerts, or when you were in the dressing room after the Ed Sullivan Show, where, my heavens, young people were just almost flinging themselves on stage, didn't you ever wonder, are these people crazy? Are we that good? Can we really produce this kind of reaction in people?
We didn't think whether we're that good or not. You've got to think you're good to do what we did, you know. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, and so there was never a time when you thought, what's going on? And that was about as deep as it got. What is happening? Or what, you know, you'd suddenly wake up in the middle of a concert or a happening, and think, what, how did I get here, you know? The last thing I remember was playing music in a club, and the next minute this. But we never thought about it too much, because it was an ongoing thing. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see. You know, we were just in the middle, being ushered from room to room.
As I recall, there were fan clubs or clubs of followers formed for each of the individuals in the organization.
Well, it was mainly a Beatle club, but, you know, they sort of fanned it out a little just to keep the...
And I'm just wondering how unified any group can be. And I'm not singling out the group that you belong to, the Beatles, but how unified can any group be when the audience has certain favorites? Maybe they like Paul more than they like John or something like that. And I wonder... I got right to it, didn't I? Yeah. I just wondered if it's awfully difficult to be friends, and do you really care about whether or not you're friends when you are a group such as the Beatles, or whether you're the Rolling Stones or whoever?
We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know. And boredom creates tension.
How can you get bored doing what you did?
Because it was going on, it was not going anywhere, you know. We'd stop touring, and we'd just sort of say, time to make an album, you know, go in the studio, and the same four of us would be looking at each other and playing the same licks.
And those silly haircuts, yeah.
Those silly haircuts that you have now. You see, notice he's got his now. And we were very good friends, and we'd known each other since we were 15, you know, and we got over all the actual fighting, the real nitty-gritty, dirty, you know, stuff, which had nothing to do with how popular we were. The same popularity, meaning Paul was always more popular than the rest of us, was going down in the dance halls in Liverpool, so it didn't come as any big surprise, you know. I mean, the kids saw him, the girls would go, ooh, ooh, you know, right away. So we knew where the score was there. But it was a group, it was the music that was interesting, that was important, you know, not who was, you know, as long as we were, you know, going forward and going somewhere, it didn't matter.
But all of a sudden there just wasn't any further progress. It was the same old over and over again. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it just got like a marriage that doesn't work or something.
Now, there are some groups that are quite open in their advocacy in the music that they present. They advocate social justice. They call for an end to war. They wish for a time when there might be a change in the drug possession laws. Your music did not do that. There wasn't a great deal of out-and-out editorialization in the songs that the Beatles did. At least I didn't feel it, and I don't think that a lot of parents felt it.
Now, all our messages were subliminal, you know. Meaning we were sending messages out, all right, but...
yeah, but what kinds of messages?
Just reporting on the state we were in, you know, looking back on it. And we made things like All You Need Is Love, you know, which is was our version.
That's a pretty wholesome message, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wholesome. But it was still a change in attitude. We were part of that psychedelic stuff. But which groups you talking about this advocate change?
Well, you know, I really don't know them offhand, except I sat down one evening with David Crosby, and we were talking about some songs that have been done by a number of groups, and since I don't have them fixed in my memory, I shouldn't say it was the Rolling Stones or it was this or that or the other thing.
It must have been people doing Dylan songs more likely.
All right.
Yeah. Are we on or what? No.
Yes, we are on, but we're on back there. Did you want to turn around and wave to the people?
I'd just like to know where it's coming from.
All right, you're over here, and I'm over there, and we're over there.
Yeah.
Huh?
Hi.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I like the set now. It's got better, you know. I watch the show all the time.
Thank you. But in any event, your message was subliminal. You didn't have any axe to grind with social injustice, or did you?
No, our only axe was we were the first working class singers that stayed working class and pronounced it. Didn't try and change our accents, which in England were looked down upon, probably still are. Like a Bronx accent, it's equivalent to that. You know. The only change was our image, you know, being slightly... What do you want? What do you want?
Get me off the hook.
Yeah, you're right.
A Bronx accent, it could be a Brooklyn accent, it could be...
Oh yeah, Brooklyn was the one I meant, actually.
Okay, all right, fine. Just get me off the hook.
Because that sounds like Liverpool. They talk like that there, duty, you know? I mean, all the stars in England before... There were a couple of sort of rock and roll stars before us, but any major star in England had to change his voice. They do it in America to get on TV and radio, right? Hi, I'm from nowhere. The one George Carlin does. Well, that goes in England, too.
Do you know that I once took an audition at a station in the southern part of the United States with a young woman who wanted to do the weather forecast on the television station. And for some curious reason, a southern accent at that time was not acceptable even in the southern United States. And so she asked the engineers if they could put the filter on the microphone that took the southern accent out of all of our voices.
And of course, there is no such filter.
No.
And you had to be there, and then you would have realized how humorous that was at the
Well,
time.
I laughed, didn't I?
Yeah, but you laughed because you're a good guy.
No, filter, I understand the business, you know. Recording, filters. Look funny from the side.
Do you think?
Yeah. Go on.
I don't think you look so.
No,
Look to
it's
the
not
side
bad,
again.
it's not
No,
bad.
it's not bad.
You're just not used to seeing yourself sideways, that's what it is.
Were the Beatles before the groupies, or did you have those?
Oh, we had them, yes.
I mean, not did you have them, but were they?
They didn't
around?
call them.
Well, did you have them? I guess
They
that's
were great, Tom. They were
Huh?
great. They didn't call them groupies then. I forgot what we used to call them. Something like slags, you know.
Slags.
So there's some word they had in England for it, and yeah, I mean, one of the main reasons to get on stage is it's the quickest way of making contact, you know. And you know, you went to see those movies with Elvis or somebody in it when we were still in Liverpool, and you'd see everybody waiting to see him, right? And I'd be waiting there too, and they'd all scream when he came on the screen, right? So we thought, that's a good job. That's why most musicians are on stage, actually.
Why is that?
To get a little, Tom, to get a little extra.
What, a little extra money?
Yeah, you know what it is. It is 2 o'clock, right? We're all right.
No, you got to be kidding me. Is that one of the big reasons, the sexual aspects of singing? That's the reason most of these great
I would say
dedicated
that
artists
any
are on
performers-
stage, that they don't care about their music, that they're just up there for a little extra?
No, but that is a good incentive for all performers. Let's not just pin down the poor musician.
And it wasn't, well, you speak for yourself, John.
Well, all right. I can't speak for musicians then.
No, and please don't speak for those of us who toil in the television vineyard, because that is the farthest thing from our minds.
Of course.
Yes.
I understand that.
Now, and
Got
you
to do
say
the news as well.
And then I could assume that when you say that going on the stage to perform music is one of the best ways of making contact,
Yeah.
that what you're saying is it's one of the best ways of making sexual contact.
Well, yes, we're not looking to have a card game. That's what it is. You know? I mean, you don't go on stage and think, that would make a nice card game.
most of the young women who follow the rock groups then were very, very young. They were in their teens. And I just wonder if ever there was a problem where an irate father or mother might have called the dressing room on occasion and said, hey, what's going on down there? And you probably said, quiet, there's a card game going on.
Yes, sure. No, I mean, in the very early days when we were playing dance halls, there were just a certain type, which you call groupies now, which would be available for functions at the end of the night. Mm-hmm. And in general, most kids would just go home with their boyfriend or whatever, you know. Mm-hmm. And there was always a small group that just went for any performer. They didn't care whether it was a comedian or a man who ate glass, you know, as if it was on stage.
Right, the guy who swept up after the elephants. Hey,
yeah,
where are you going?
Right,
yeah.
right. And actually, the people that work for rock groups usually get more action than the actual rock group, right?
I don't say right to me because I
well,
don't know.
you can imagine it, Tom. They audition.
Right.
They get the cream of the crop, you know. If you want to see Elvis, you got to see me first.
Gotcha. As you said, right. Let me pause here for these announcements from our affiliated stations. We'll continue with John Lennon in 2 minutes and 5 seconds.
You said earlier that it became boring to stay with that group. Why is what you're doing now not boring when that was?
Because I can change musicians whenever I like. And it tends to get into a format, you know. Because we were together much longer than the public knew us. You know, it wasn't just from '64. I was 24 in '64, and I've been playing with Paul since I was 15. And he's very nice. and George about a year later or something. So it's a long time we spent together in all the most extraordinary circumstances, from, you know, lousy rooms to great rooms. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't just the public just think, oh, you were only together 5 years, we've only got 5 million records, you know. But we were together a long, long time, and we just became stale musically.
But how are you not stale musically now, aside from changing
because
musicians?
I'm interacting with different musicians. To me, they're musicians. They're not just, you know, it's not like, to people, they're all stars, right? It's like having Elton John and Elvis and a few people playing, you know. To me, it isn't. It's just musicians, and to them, it's the same. So if you play with the same person all the time, you get into a rut. Even if you play tennis with the same person.
Gets boring.
It comes to a time when you know every move, and you have to find somebody else to play with.
As you listen to music today, I don't know if you listen to the
Yeah.
radio a lot or if you listen mostly to records, but what are things that you see that you think are good or bad?
Well, that's pretty general. I like the disco music that's out now, which is great music. I like the thing that happened in Jamaica called reggae.
Excuse me?
There's a music in Jamaica called reggae, which has been around for years under the disguise of ska, blue beat, etc., but it finally formed itself into reggae. And that's about the really newest thing that's happened in music in the last 5 years or 6
Do
years.
you think anything new happens to music, or is it a continual series of cycles, and that maybe 100,000 years ago somebody had the same kind of beat or the same kind of whatever it is that makes it different, and that maybe the whole thing is just going in cycles, or are we in fact discovering things all the time?
I think there's something to the cycle thing, but I think if you apply the cycle idea to it, that's a cycle for everything, not just music. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But it's snowballing either with just because of electricity or because of all the garbage everybody picks up, because we keep inventing things, right? So it does change, and it has cycles in a way, like I think the whole whatever it is, the universe is a series of cycles. But the music has to change because they keep inventing new things, like, films change, it's now video, so it's in that way it's different.
But don't you know that in about 1988 there's going to be a group come out that is going to pick right back to the sound that you guys had in the since you're 15 years old, and all kinds of critics and all kinds of writers are going to say, wow, look at this, we've got this whole new sound that's reminiscent of the Beatles back in the 60s.
Well, they'll probably be playing Grutsch blobs and Zach Dungas, right? They'll have new instruments, and although rock and roll was brand new when it came out and excited everybody, it had roots in blues and jazz, so in that way they would have their roots in the 60s, 70s, and possibly further back. But you can't say that rock and roll is like the 20s music, although if you look for it, you can find out where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find out where Beatles music came from, or any music came from. It's just like it has its history.
Before we get into your immigration status, and we'll bring Mr. Wilds out at that time.
Hooray!
Hooray! And that is a controversy for you and for
Yeah.
people who would want you to stay in this country. You've been involved in some other mini controversies, like the time that you were on the cover of the album without any clothes on, and like the time
Yes.
that you and Yoko had everybody or invited people to come into the bedroom while you were there.
We held a bed in for peace, yeah.
A bed in for peace, exactly. Why do you do those things? And I don't ask you that because I want to engender some flip response from you, but what does that gain for you as John Lennon, or what does it gain for the cause of peace in the case of the bed-in for you to do something like that?
Yoko and I, when we got together, decided that whatever we did was going to be in the papers, whether it's Richard or Liz or so-and-so gets married or whatever people like us do is going to be in the papers. So we decided to utilize the space we would occupy anyway by getting married with a commercial for peace and also a theatrical event. And the theatrical event we came up with, which utilized the least energy with the maximum effect, was to work from bed. And what we virtually had was a 7-day press conference in bed, where the press fought. The first day they fought at the door to get in, thinking there was something, sexy going on. And then they
Licentious.
that was the word I was looking for. And they found two people talking about peace, And reporters always have 5 minutes with you, or 10 minutes with you. We let them ask anything for as long as they wanted for 7 days. And all the time we just kept plugging peace. And the story that came out was John and Yoko do bed in for peace. And we were just promoting peace, like you promote any product. They promote war, join the Marines, join this. We were promoting peace.
Mm-hmm.
The Naked album cover was less general than that, meaning we didn't have. That was one of the first things we did. We thought, we felt like two virgins. That's what the album was called, because we were in love, just met, and we were trying to make something. And we thought to show everything. People are always looking at people like me, trying to see some secret, or what do they do? What do they do? Do they go to the bathroom? Do they eat?
Do you?
I do, quite a lot. And we just said, here, And that was in 1968, and all hell broke loose. But now they're jumping around naked all over the place, right?
Yes, they are, as a matter of fact.
Right, so we were just ahead of our time.
What difficulties are there for people who are in the public eye, who know, as you and Yoko did, that whatever you do, it's going to be picked up in the press, and you really can't go out and, I suppose, have a quiet dinner or go to the park or go to a movie or something like that? What difficulties are there in your life when there's such adulation for you and such curiosity about what you do all the time?
Well, that's cool, because that's part, I reckon that's part of the
What, part of the
price,
territory?
You know? Yeah. But, you see, having gone through the Beatlemania thing, nowadays it's nothing like that. I mean, I can walk down the street and somebody just say, "Oh, hi, John," and they usually say, "How's your immigration?" You know, if it's in New York, right? And they don't hassle me. I might sign one autograph, two autographs, you know? And I don't get hassled. And I went through that period where I actually couldn't go anywhere. And so now it's like heaven. I can go and eat. We go and eat. We go to the movies. We go wherever we want. If there's an announcement, like there's an opening and everybody's going to be there, you get a lot of noise and cameras and flashbulbs. But if we just decide to go to dinner, it's cool, you know? We're probably less recognizable than you now, being on every night.
I doubt that.
You're on every night. You kidding?
But it doesn't make any difference, because when you were on, you had 35, 40, 50 million people. I'll never forget the time that you came to Los Angeles. I was working there for Channel 5, and you were giving a concert at, I don't remember where it was. Hollywood Bowl, is that right? Thank you. And there were the lines for the tickets, and there was all the attendant publicity prior to the appearance and everything else. And one of our reporters went out and covered all this, and he came back and he said, "It's going to be wild out there tonight." And I, because I'm not very smart, went on the air and I said, "Well, if you'd like to know where the Beatles are, call this guy, and his home number is." And I mean, his phone didn't stop ringing for 4 days. It was just an obscenity. And I wish that if he's watching, I'm sorry I did that. And so your viewability or your visibility is so tremendously high, or at least was then, and I just wondered if it had kind of slopped over into your career now.
No, I mean, I can get around now, you know. I'm glad too. I don't miss it. I'm glad it happened, but I don't miss it.
Yeah,
like
in spite of the boredom, in spite of the fact that maybe there were little dissensions, those were good times for you.
Oh, huh? Yeah. I mean, the boredom was in the music. I mean, that came after all the Beatlemania.
Did you save your money?
What we could get our hands on, yeah.
What do you mean, what you could get your hands on?
Well, a lot of it got siphoned off before we even got near it, you know. I mean, we didn't know anything about business or anything like that, you know. And there's a lot of money. There's a lot of millionaires around this world, so, yeah. But that's part of the action, too.
Okay. Let me pause here for these announcements. We'll continue with John Lennon on tomorrow in 2 minutes and 5 seconds, and I trust you'll stay tuned. Thank you.